Hello and welcome to this episode of One Take CEO Interviews, which is brought to you by the executive consulting firm Platinum Group. Today, we're talking with Leslie Holman, owner and CEO of Pinnacle Performance Group. Pinnacle focuses on identifying who needs to be doing what differently within an organization to improve business results. Leslie purchased the firm in 2013, after leading change through various positions with private equity-backed companies, developing strategic direction for large companies while at McKinsey Co, and designing and implementing solutions for Ford Motor Company. She has an MBA from Carlson and a BS in mechanical engineering, and was named a 2017 Women in Business honoree by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal. Leslie, welcome to One Take.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You can tell I haven't had enough coffee this morning, so thank you for bearing with me through the intro, but quite a history, and I think it's cool that you have an engineering degree. I often see that in leaders. Having that engineering mindset really helps them with problem solving. And given your background, I was wondering, Pinnacle began in 1990 providing training and operations support for the restaurant industry. So what brought you to come over and say, I want to buy this company and do something with it?
Well, I always tell people it's an odd story of starting out in the automotive industry and then buying a training company that now does strategic execution, but it makes sense to me. Kind of the highlights of this story, I would say, starting at Ford Motor Company and the spinoff there at that time of Visteon Group, there's a lot of parallels, particularly between the restaurant group and an industrial environment. One of those is it is your frontline employees who truly build or serve your product and represent your brand. And without the proper engagement and empathy and listening to those employees, you're not able to achieve the business results that you want. Yep. And so be that a manufacturing company like Ford or Visteon, any of the large firms I had the opportunity to work with at McKinsey, or coming now to Pinnacle, be it starting with restaurant organizations or other large transformations, there is that common thread that success is bred through employees at all levels. And it's often that frontline employee who is not heard, listened to, or often sadly respected enough in how critical they are in the success. Yep. So that's the thread that ties them all through.
Okay, and I've always loved that. I mean, I've also seen though, from being within corporations, then also on the outside, sometimes leadership doesn't seem to care about that. I mean, I know that sounds a little crass, but they think that they know their frontline employees, or they think that their reporting to them know what's going on in the front line well enough, so they don't really need to worry about all that. So how do you make sure that you can get them, first of all, to realize this is extremely important and maybe they're not doing as well on this front as they think they are?
I often think it's the ability to translate language. Mm-hmm. If in many of the experiences I've had, I view myself as the liaison between the folks at the front line and the folks in the boardroom. And there are two different types of dialogue that are used to articulate a situation or a problem on the front line versus what you would bring to an executive team. And I think it is the ability to listen and translate that message that is really critical. And sadly, oftentimes a job of an external consultant or partner is to bring some gravity and seriousness to some of those messages. So I'm not saying anything that isn't often already known within the organization, but my job is the messenger, and I have the platform to be heard, and thus carry those messages from the front line back to the folks in a way that they can be heard.
Yep. And how do you identify the gaps between the front line and the boardroom? How do you identify the most important ones, and then how do you translate? Is there an example that you can give us?
I would say an example, a quick example is working for a restaurant client once. They asked us to go out and say, hey, how can we make our, in restaurant industry, they have monthly specials. So how can we make our monthly specials work better? And tactically, are there things that we could be doing better in the print materials that we send out to help that? So that was our charge. But I think it goes back to that engineering background of the root cause analysis of, okay, so this is our charge, but people talk about the 5 whys. So like, why? In our conversations, it was allowing that person on the other end to be heard. And in this specific example, it had nothing to do with print materials. It had all to do with the fact that these franchise owners didn't necessarily believe these monthly products were going to help their business be successful. So that's not where they're going to prioritize their time. Well, that's the issue that leaders need to hear.
Yep.
So I also think it's the confidence to go off script, to not just do what you've been tasked, but to find the right answer and have the confidence to bring that back.
Yeah, and you also identified the real challenge. So that's critical. Just in terms of everything that's gone on in the last 12 months, what have you been hearing from your clients in terms of how they've had to adjust? In particular, when it comes to better connecting with frontline employees, because we've heard of all these CEOs now doing Zoom meetings and doing much more communication. But what have you seen and heard out there in terms of how they've had to adjust from what they were like before COVID as leaders?
I think we've seen a really exciting trend of flattening of the organization. There's a really big difference just in terms of fairness that comes across. And if you have a CEO sitting on a stage with hundreds or thousands of people in an audience versus everyone has an equal box on a Zoom call. And so we have seen people feeling much more comfortable in some of these interactions with providing feedback to leaders higher up, having dialogue back and forth. I truly think the chat feature in some of these online platforms has been game-changing for people who are maybe a little less confident, but to still get their voices heard. And I've seen enthusiasm from leaders of recognizing how powerful that flattening can be and how much quicker they can get information.
How much do you think will snap back to the way it was, and how much of this is going to be permanent?
I think a lot of that is defined by organizational culture. I think truly there is benefit to be had there, and I think it is whether organizations are thinking futuristically about ways of working and how can we flex and be different, or if it's just a let's get through this phase and go back to the way things were.
Speaking of organizational culture, tell us a little bit about yours and what's been different for you as a leader these last 12 months.
Well, our organizational culture is probably one of the things we're most proud at Pinnacle. And I say, when I purchased Pinnacle, and have since built it, I designed a place I wanted to work with no apologies. And so we were already an organization. Everyone who works at our firm works hourly, and they have the flexibility to work if they want to work 10 hours a week or 20, 25 hours a week. We look for really talented people who want to do something different. Because of that, we're used to flexing. We're used to a lot of people working virtually. More of that independence was already ingrained in our culture. And I think that really gave us a huge benefit as we went into COVID of being really versed in online collaboration and flexibility and not being dependent on that need to walk by someone else's desk. And I think because of that, combined with our culture of truly living your whole self, we're very inclusive of family and life in our workday, showing up holistically. While COVID has been very difficult for everyone, I don't want to diminish the challenges our employees have faced. I think we had a better leg up going into it, already having established some of those things in our culture.
You mentioned going by the office or going by somebody's cube, and how I miss that. I mean, we're getting back to it, but just the ability to collaborate in person. And so I'm wondering, how did you have to shift gears on that a little bit? And how have you been able to keep people energized and positive and focused during not only COVID-19, but everything that's happened with George Floyd's murder, politics, and everything else that has come up in the last 12 months?
One day at a time, I think, is the best. There's no playbook for any of this, and all leaders are I think, trying to do their best. It's flexibility and trying new things, and I think it's also really being open to feedback and seeking it out and like, is this working? Is this not working? Some of the examples, we've had to be really intentional about, we call it the water cooler talk. You can't just take that away. That is what connects us. I literally just came off a meeting where in our weekly meeting notes, there was a picture of a chicken and a smoker full of meat, because we actually spend time like, hey, how was your weekend? What did you do? And in addition, there was some people's kids playing in the park, and it's bringing those things, forcing ourselves to bring those things into what is more of a structured environment that we would have just normally said like, hey, good morning, how was your weekend? We still have, those things are so critical. So we have to do those things. And then I think it's, again, it goes back to addressing our employees as whole people and understanding, there's trauma in our environment, particularly for us in Minneapolis, recognizing what's going on in our community and how that impacts each one of our employees differently, and acknowledging it, I think, is the first step. As we're filming this, we had a verdict that came in last week in the George Floyd trials. And I think for us as an organization, an example is just sending a note in that hour between when we all found out the verdict was coming and a verdict was read, and just acknowledging that this is a time of tension and mixed emotions and feelings for our employees, and to remind them that they have to take care of themselves first. If that means you need to clear your schedule, if that means you need to reach out to someone on the team or someone through our EAP program, that we want you to take care of yourself, and acknowledging that this is real and this is the world we're in, and not pushing it aside to pretend we can focus on work 100% of the time.
Well, that's a really good point. Being present as a CEO, that's really important. And everything that we just talked about, is there one challenge in particular last year that means more to you than any other in terms of how you solved it?
I would say that the challenge our organization had, which is we're so focused on creating an environment that gives our employees the ability to truly be authentic and live the lives that they want to live in a balanced way. I would say the hardest challenge for us was honoring that, the importance of that value, when the challenge is coming down on everyone all at the same time. We had a huge proportion of our employees that all suddenly had an influx of being teachers as well. In recognizing there was a desire to cut hours, but also that we still had client projects, and we have a value called caring professional that says we are professionals first, and we will show up and act and engage with our clients as professionals, but we're also human, and kids are going to get sick, houses are going to break, things are going to happen in the world, and we have to balance that. And suddenly we had a very one-sided situation. And I think that's where it goes back to openness and listening as a leader to say, I don't necessarily know what the right answer for this is, but let's talk about it as a team. Talk about it with our leadership team, talk about it with our extended team, and come up with a way that works for all of us. And to me, that's been the greatest lever I've used in some of these challenges, is just having the confidence to know I don't know what to do, but together as a team, we can figure it out.
So how did you get through that? I mean, did you take on a ton of work and not sleep for a couple of weeks so your employees could kind of catch up on everything else, and then you caught up on your sleep later?
I would say there was a period of that, but thankfully I also have a team that holds me accountable to the same values I hold them accountable to. And then it took us a little bit of rethinking and reorganizing. I would say, the end of last spring was a little tricky, and just how do we keep the wheels on the bus, and also support our clients as they're all going through the same thing. But you take it one day at a time, and you figure out who's got the capacity today, who's got the capacity tomorrow. And then we were able to put more structure and process around that as we went into the summer, to say, okay, we're a very positive place, but let's assume the worst about what's going to happen with COVID. What does your life look like? What do your needs look like? And let's plan to that and hope for better. So we were able to pivot pretty quickly, but it wasn't perfect for a few months, but that's part of what business is just rolling with the punches and trying to do better.
Yep. And what's your greatest challenge still to be solved? Or as you look at the rest of this year and into next year, what's your greatest challenge?
Predicting the future. I think that's everyone. I think it's figuring out, with all the different dynamics that are happening in the market, how will that impact our organization, both from a business side, but also from our employees. So how do we continue? We are on a course of thoughtful growth, and balancing the opportunities we have to serve more clients with the resources of bringing in great people and making commitments to them and their families that we will support them, and just keeping those two in balance when there is a lot of unknowns in the world around us.
That sounds good. And is there a question I should have asked you today that I didn't?
That is a good one. I hadn't thought about that one ahead of time, but I would say just, what am I most proud of in what I do every day. That's probably something I would love to share is I think that the thing that's most fun about our business is we get to help companies truly make lasting impact and difference. And we get to do it in a way that we're all really proud of. So I get to work with a group of really smart, wonderful, amazing people that I'm so proud to call colleagues and friends, and empower them to go out and solve really tough problems. And, you know, if you get to work with great people and work on hard problems, life is pretty good.
Well, it sounds like a great company to work for, and it sounds like you're doing great work. So Leslie, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
I also want to thank our sponsor today, the Platinum Group, which for 40 years has helped companies with transitions, financial turnarounds, mergers and acquisitions, and crises. If your company needs help or would appreciate a second opinion, give them a call at 952-829-5700. You can learn more about Platinum Group online at theplatinumgrp.com. I also want to thank all of you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on One Take.